the frustration about the entire media apparatus uniting behind one narrative when it comes to Biden's withdrawal in Afghanistan. That really just that was really frustrating to watch. I'm wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating narrative. And I also want to throw in the earthquake in Haiti and just mention my co-host, Rebecca Azor, who's lost some family members there. It's been a heavy week between that, Afghanistan, and COVID-19. It's just been, like you said, it's been kind of heavy. In regards to the narrative of Afghanistan, it is such a ubiquitous narrative that I had to wake up from my from my deathbed this morning and call into my own show to speak, to make sure I register my dissent with one of my co-hosts and their position on Afghanistan, because the narrative has really sunk deep in the mainstream media that this was an abject failure by Joe Biden. But I'm looking at all the pieces as they fall. It is so choreographed that I can't think that this is actually a failure. I think that this was planned because it's just too neatly done in terms of the public relations. And the only people that really have a problem with what's happening is the mainstream media. But you got to consider who their sponsors are.
Right. And so I also think that it's not just sponsors, too. It's also sources with a lot of these national security reporters. They take what their sources say very seriously. They develop these relationships, and like there's very little big picture understanding of these Langley sources, these, FBI sources, what have you. There's a bunch of intel that they could give to you, and they're giving you specific intel for a purpose.
That's right.
And so like always the conclusion is, well, we have to remain here. We have to invade here because that's curated for that exact purpose.
That's right. It is. And I think it's one of those situations where we really have to understand one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist kind of perspective, because we automatically insert ourselves into the conversation. The observer, we inject ourselves into the international conversation through the lens of America and democracy and spreading freedom, when in reality, we are Darth Vader on the international stage. We are the galactic empire. We are the people that many nations have to survive simply because we have decided to occupy their territory for 20, 30, 40, 60 years. And so the narrative that is being spun by the mainstream media absolutely has a connection to their assets on the ground. And so we call those assets, from the American perspective, we call them our allies. But from the people who are on the ground, some of them, those are the Judases that worked in conjunction with the greatest empire in the history of the planet to occupy that nation for 20 years. Right.
And saying that to anybody covering this, their heads would explode, because there's this childlike American exceptionalism that is an undercurrent of so much of what the press does here. And it's also inflating their own importance in, well, we're covering these grave threats and we are a part of, and I'm not besmirching media in general, but I am besmirching a lot of national security reporters. That part of the media is a real cesspool.
That's right. Because what they're not going to tell you is that if you take a course on national security at a master's level or even a doctoral level, and they outline the top 4 security priorities for the United States, number 1 is not democracy and freedom. Number 1, literally in our courses that we do this on an academic level based on the research, the number 1 national security implication for the United States has always been capitalism. Always has been. And so we have to understand it through that lens. We're not going there to spread democracy. When have we spread democracy in the last 60 years? Right? You can make the argument about our interaction and going into World War II. That's a justifiable one. And I'll argue on the side of America in that perspective. But in terms of everything else, Vietnam, and
we kind of did the cleanup in World War II. The Soviets lost many more people than we did, and that's not a part of our
that's not part of our common understanding because of the narrative of capitalism versus communism and the ensuing Cold War. But there's just so many layers here that is unnecessarily, no, it's not unnecessary. It's intentionally reduced to intentional obtuseness because they need the general public to automatically say anything that is against America is automatically bad. But I'm sorry, I know what America does on the international stage, so we should know better.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.